there. For today's page, I'm going to be using some brand new product and some really old product together on a little bit of a more artsy page. I have two photos that were taken on Hilton Head Island on a recent trip. We go every year, and one of the things that I think that makes the island different from any of the other beach areas that I've been to are the trees. When you step off the beach, you're under shade, and they make it, I gather, very difficult to even cut down a tree on the island. That's not to say there's not plenty of concrete and asphalt and buildings and things, but there's a lot of really beautiful areas beyond the beach. So I wanted to share that on a page. I have this stamp that I got at Hobby Lobby. I love trees, and I thought this was so gorgeous, and it's big. So I'm going to be using that, probably embossing it on the watercolor paper, and then doing something with color, either gelatos or watercolors. I haven't quite decided behind that, to add some color. And I know I want to do a lot of leaves on the trees, and that's where my really old leaf punches are going to come in. These I bought about probably 2001, something like that. And they are very, very heavily used, or have been very, very heavily used. They're hard to punch, though. What I typically do is put paper in them and put them on the floor and stomp on them to get the images to come out. But I've used those a lot. I also have some leaves in Cricut cartridges, so I'll probably do those as well. And I don't think I'm going to keep everything on watercolor paper. I think I'm going to use another paper for a background, at least top and bottom. I have some lettering options, but before I get to that, let's talk about colors. Of course, since I'm doing trees, I'm going to do a lot of greens, and I went to my scrap drawer to get papers for cutting, and I knew that I needed something beyond just green. That's when I took out my cardstock deck that I posted a few days ago with for how to organize your cardstock if you have a lot of cardstock like I do. It's also a great way to determine colors. I knew I was going to be working with green, but what other color would go with this and my photos? I didn't really want to use brown. I wanted some sort of color, and I looked at reds and I thought those were too bright, and I kept going through, and I finally decided on the oranges. The oranges gave me enough contrast. I like this dark rust color, and I also like these melon kind of colors. And so I found a few scraps of paper that fit these colors as well and really look nice with the photos and with the greens that I'm going to be using. So that's how I figured out what contrast color that I thought would look good with this. And then I have lots of lettering options that go with both of those. So I need to emboss my tree and then start doing some coloring and get that area of the page going.
First challenge, I have a stamp that's larger than any of the blocks I own. So I used this stamp a few days ago at my friend's house, and she has a stamp press, but I don't. I'm going to have to put that on my wish list. But I did find this piece of plexiglass. It was actually part of my wedding cake many, many years ago. And it works perfectly as a stamp. I tried a pie plate, that didn't work, it wasn't flat enough. But this is working, so it's going to hold my stamp, and I tested it out a while ago, and it gives a good image. I'm going to ink this in Versamark, and then I can press it down onto my watercolor paper, which I'll need to first coat with some embossing powder. Speed the video up here just a little bit. Okay, and sorry about my head there. Press that down good, and kind of barely see it on the video. You'll see it more here in just a second as I start to sprinkle some embossing powder. I'm putting a little bit of copper on first. I want a mixture of copper and pewter. So a little bit of copper and then coating it good with the pewter, and then just keep reusing that pewter over the top. These are both Stamping Up powders. I like the fine quality of their stamp powders. I don't think they sell the copper anymore, but I just bought that pewter. And I didn't get quite as much copper as I probably needed to, but you can see a little bit of variation in color there. All right, I've moved the photos over to the side. I wanted to see where they were going to go so I would see where my test area is, a place where I can play with colors a little bit and see what's going to match. And I had two different shades of green there, and neither of them worked, but when I mixed them together with my watercolors, they came out right. And down here at the bottom, I'm adding a little bit of ground or sand in a brown shade. And now starting to add this green. First this more Kelly green that's just a little bit of too much true green, and then going over it with the olive, and that's giving me the color that I'm looking for that will go better with the trees in my photo. And I am by no means an expert on watercolors. I just like to play. I think they're fun ways to add some color to a layout. And I got a color in there I didn't really care for, so I just mopped it up with the paper towel and then went back over it. Now I'm adding some teal, and when you see my hand dart off to the right there, I'm also doing the very right edge of the page because the photos don't go all the way to the edge of the page, so I need to do the right side as well. Just it's the same thing as the left. It's just it doesn't happen to be showing on camera, but just a little bit of the same colors going across there. So adding some teals and then different shades of blue to the sky. Throwing a little water in from time to time to mix all this together. Now it's along about here that I thought it would look nice to have a sunset. I didn't follow the leave well enough alone philosophy, and sometimes I don't follow that in life either, and you're going to see what happens as I try to add a sunset and I just got a muddy mess. So, maybe a way to do that with watercolors, but if there is, I don't know what it is. So I had to go back over my green and then go back over my blue. Unfortunately, watercolor paper is very forgiving. You can put lots of layers on it. You can dry them in between. I haven't done that here so far. I'll dry it in a little bit. A lot more blue up there at the top so that I have enough room to hold the photos on the right side. And now I'm drying it and bringing it back and looking, and the bottom I think needs a little bit different color, and I've got some gelatos I'm considering using to add some color as well. But first off, let's fill in some of the blanks there on the left hand side where the color didn't quite fill in enough, and I'm adding a little more depth to the sky with a little bit more blue. Again, it's just playing and having some fun, and as you can see what I did earlier, I used the towel to mop up things that didn't work out quite so well. And I was a little worried down here at the bottom that I was about to do the same thing as the top, and I was adding this brown over the golden brown color that I had down there. I was afraid I was getting it too dark, but it finished out really nicely. When you see it with the final paper, it's amazing how well it matched. I think that's more of a happy accident. Okay, I've got it dried again, and now I'm ready to play with my gelatos. These are Faber-Castell's metallics. So I have the red, blue, green, and I think there's a purple in there. I'm going to use the blues and greens. And I'm just experimenting in my area that's going to be under the photos to see how they mix. And I like how they look, and I'm just putting a little bit in. It's kind of like lipstick is the way this stuff goes on. You can blend it with your fingers, but I'm using water and the paintbrush. When water is applied and these things dry, they dry permanent. And they give a nice shine, as I say, since they're the metallic. You can start to see that coming through in the video. It just adds, again, a little more depth to the look there with this behind this tree. And then I'm going to do some of the green, and this part of the layout is almost finished. Now I'm kind of brushing this over the trunk. I'm going to go over that trunk with a paper towel and just pull that color off once I get everything dried. You can see the shine coming through there a little bit. And then I'll use the heat gun and also let this finish air drying. And there's the finished background for the middle of the page. And that area there with all my experiments is going to be covered with the two photos, and I'm going to pop those up with dimensionals. And there's the beige paper. Now I'm playing with leaves here, and I cut a bunch of leaves off the Cricut, and I was so delighted with them I even coated them with some glaze, and then I got them on the layout and did not like them very much at all. I really didn't like the row of leaves down there below. I tried them at the top, but maybe they're just too big. I don't know. What seemed to work the best were my punch leaves. My ancient punches still do the best job. I chose only the oak one and not the maple one because that's more relevant to the area we're going to. They don't really have maple trees, they have oak trees. Before I get to the leaves though, I did trim down my watercolor paper, and I am going to add a little bit of stamping before I apply it to the background paper. Next, again, I'm experimenting. I love having this area over here where I can play. I could do this on a scrap sheet of paper, but since this is going to get covered up, I might as well use it as my experimental space. That's a Stamping Up stamp, an old one that has a nature saying on it, and I stamped it with some archival ink. I've printed my journaling on the bottom of this 12 by 12 sheet, and I'm going to sew this watercolor paper down with the sewing machine. You won't see a lot of the stitching in the end, but the reason is it holds so well. So you could use adhesive, but I decided to sew it. And I'm ready to put my leaves on there, I think, after I pop up the photos. The leaves are just going to get glued on with some Tombow adhesive. I'm just doing these randomly, and I punched them out of several of those different green papers that I had from my scrap drawer. And I did put them on the floor and stomp on the punch with my foot because it's a punch that's really, really hard to use. I'm glad punches have developed a lot over the years. Now I've got my title on, and I'm trying to decide what to do with the rust color. I have used some of the rust color in the title, and I want to bring some more into the layout, and I consider putting some of that melon and rusty color down there at the bottom, and I thought that was too distracting, so then I thought a frame around this photo would look nice. I just didn't leave a whole lot of room. And then I've got some brads. I'm playing with those a bit, trying to figure out where I could put brads. I'm back to the photo here in a minute, and the way I deal with not having enough room for the frame once you've glued everything down is just to cut an L shape of the paper and then trim out as much as needed to get it to fit underneath without having to pull all that adhesive up. To trim out a little bit more before I can glue that underneath. Still looking at the brads as possibilities. And the next thing I try is some twine. And I wrapped the twine all the way around. I tied the twine, I roughed up the edges, and I didn't like it. So I ended up taking the twine off. It was covering up my stitching, and it just was distracting. So here's what I ended up doing. I put a brad up next to the word canopy, and I put one down next to the tree, and then I put some leaves underneath the text there in the middle, and I put a little bit of the rust paper on the side of the photo. So that added that color throughout, but still kept us with primarily a green and neutral layout. So that's my page. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll check out my blog for more information, and I always love to get comments.